Thank you for joining us today. Today's presentation is to inform you on how to access and use the newly developed Significant Disproportionality Data Dashboard. Our intention is to provide this data to LEAs for them to be able to review their data on a regular basis, either to be preventative on the trends or to know where best to allocate resources or supports to improve their data outcomes moving forward. So at this moment, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Del Hart, our fiscal chief.
It's good to be here this morning. Thank you, Carol, for that brief introduction. The notion of significant disproportionality is a federal requirement that all schools in the nation must abide by. This aspect of significant disproportionality deals with three main areas. First of all, with the identification of students in special education. Secondly, with the placement of students in special education. And thirdly, with discipline. Discipline includes suspensions and expulsion. The state reviews and looks at data that schools have submitted for 3 years. At the end of 3 years worth of data, if the data meets a threshold, a school is then flagged for significant disproportionality. When that happens, the school will receive an official notification from the Bureau of Special Education that explains why it was flagged for significant disproportionality. At that same time they are notified, they are also given an estimate of the 15% of IDEA-B funds that must be reserved for CCEIS activities as required by federal statute. About 3 to 4 months after the first notification is sent to the schools, the Bureau of Special Education will send a second notification, and they will give the final 15% of the money of the IDEA funding that must be reserved for CCEIS activities. At that point in time, there's additional guidance available from this office if LEAs are interested in such guidance, and all they must do is contact us and we will provide as much information as possible. At this point in time, I will turn the program over to Dan, who will explain the dashboard and the way that 15% is accounted for.
Okay, we're going to go over the actual website. Every LEA, superintendent, or CEO would have received a registration link. So all you do is click on that link. When you click on that link, if you've never registered before, no one in your LEA has registered, you'll see this screen. Again, one thing to remember is the username is always your LEA AUN. So the first time you go in here, you'll enter your name, email, password, and then register. If someone in your LEA has already registered, you will see this screen. This will tell you that someone in your district or in your LEA has already registered. It will have the email that's associated with the account. So that person, there's only one email associated with each LEA. So contact that person if it's not you, and get the email address. Okay, so now we'll log in. And again, your username is your AUN. So when you first log in, this is the page you get to. It goes over significant disproportionality. We talk about what's analyzed that Del has already mentioned. We go over the calculations a little bit. We talk about what risk ratio is, and then a link to other documents on the patent website that we'll talk about later. If you have not been flagged for significant disproportionality, you will only see at the top of the screen, you'll see home, dashboards, and contact. You will not see manage. I'll get into that in a minute. Dashboards is where you'll actually see your data and the status of the 14 areas that we review. Again, for security, each LEA has a separate access code. All you do is click copy to clipboard, paste it, and then choose a year. And again, we've been doing this for 3 years, and each year has 3 years worth of data. So you can choose one 3-year cycle. And again, we're doing identification, placement, and discipline. So first, let me go down here. So if you have a green check, that means the LEA has not been flagged in that category, and you didn't exceed the threshold for 3 consecutive years. The yellow check is your awarding status. You have reached the threshold for the two most recent years. A red X is you've exceeded the threshold for 3 consecutive years. The gray dashes means we didn't do a calculation because of sample size or there was no data. So let's go a little further here with we'll check on the warning status. So again, this is total removals for discipline. And when we evaluate this, we do it for every race. So the orange arrow shows the threshold. So for discipline, it's 2.5. And you can see this is the warning state. So if you mouse over each one, you can see the actual ratio. Again, it's 2.5, so it's 2.97. Click further into this, you'll see your actual data. And again, the data sources. So for identification, we're always using the 12-1 count for identification, placement, and discipline. For identification, we're using the 12-1 count and then comparing that to your total enrollment, which is your October 1 collection. For placement, we're just using the 12-1 count. We're looking at educational environment and then total special ed enrollment. For discipline, again, we use 12-1 count, and then we also use the July discipline table 9A collection. I won't get into all the calculations, but again, we'll talk about this later, but there's a link right here that takes you to the overview and goes over all calculations. We have like 4 or 5 different scenarios in there. I'll show one more quick. This one, again, has been flagged. So you'll see that they're over the threshold for 3 consecutive years. All right, I talked about LEAs that were not flagged. If you were flagged, you have this Manage tab. So this specific LEA was flagged in 2 different years. So there's a process that's involved when you are flagged, and that's all in the letter that you've received. The first thing you have to do is look at your policies, practice, and procedures. And if you have to make any changes to them, you would report them publicly. So the first step in the process is actually clicking this assurance. So here's the assurance. Read through that again. It talks about if you made any revisions or changes, you posted it, and then you would just check, I have read, and click submit. For the 18-19 school year for this year, they're already at this process. So whatever's highlighted is where you are in the process. So they've already checked the assurance for the policies, practices, and procedures. Dell also mentioned that you receive in the letter your 15% allocation. Let me get that right here. So that's the actual amount. If you were in this phase, it's estimated. Right now it's estimated. So initially you'll get the estimated amount, and then a year later you'll receive the actual amount. So again, this is actually a 6-year process, 3 years worth of data. The following year you are identified, you're flagged and identified. Then you review your policies, practices, and procedures. The next step is you'll receive another letter with your actual 15%. And then the following year in your expenditure year is where you actually spend the money. When the money is spent, there's an expenditure assurance. Again, read through it. All we're asking is that you check that you've actually spent the money. We're not asking for specifics on anything, just that you spent the money. And there is an allowable expenditure document here that will help you determine how you spend the money. And again, just click submit. So that is basically the website. And now I'll hand it over to Jody Rissinger, and she'll talk about documents on the website.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to take you now to the patent website, patent.net, if you haven't been there before. On there, under the legal tab, you'll click on that, scroll down to significant disproportionality. and you'll see a link to click on the overview calculation methodology. That is an 8-page document fact sheet that goes through significant disproportionality, some of the things that you saw in the beginning on the dashboard, as well as taking you into a review of how the calculation is determined, sample calculations, and then some sample resources that also exist under the Resources tab. Under this calculation methodology, there is another link to information about the general provisions of the Mandatory Comprehensive Coordinating Early Intervening Services, or CCEIS, as we refer to it in your notification as well as the dashboard. Under the Resources tab, there are several different options for you. It will show you some of the patent resources, Metro Center, and other equity resources out there available for you on the patent site, as well as other locations. Like Dan mentioned earlier, we use the child count data and we use the July submission for your discipline. It is incredibly important that you're taking a look at those data prior to submission. And after submission, as you receive comparison reports, we send back a last year to this year comparison for you to take a look at and do justifications. So those data are then populated into and included in the calculations that we use for this important process. I just can't stress enough how important it is that you are actually reviewing that data and making sure that the accuracy is on point.
Thank you, Jody. After reviewing this webinar, if you have any further questions, do not hesitate to reach out to Dan, Jody, or Dell, and they will be happy to assist you in this process. Thank you very much.